Shut up! Shut up! Dad, why do you want to read me? Why do you want me to read a book? Shut up! Get out of here! Shut up! You want me to read Five Nights at Freddy's book? Shut up! Stop! Are you filming me? Stop filming me! You want me to read a book? I'm not gonna read a book! I hate reading book! Stop filming me! Stop! Stop! Actually, stop! Stop! You better stop filming me. I actually don't give you consent to film me. You better not freaking post that on Facebook. Don't post it! Hey guys, so in today's live stream, we are going to be reading Samcats123am, guys. Samcats123am. I wanted to do this right now because I don't have much going on right now, and I figured streaming at 3 p.m. is a lot better than streaming at 1 in the morning or 3 a.m. for all of my East Coast brothers and sisters. Stop! Are you filming me? Stop filming me! So, today we are going. Oh, I think I may have wrote the wrong description. I think we're doing chapters 5 through 6. Yeah. Okay. So we're doing chapters 5 through 6 right now. I'm liking it. It's like everything we've done in the book. That's taken like 2.5 hours to read. Is this, and in the movie, it's like 10 minutes worth of stuff. Kevin, I do like a lot of the additions here. I was gonna say this yesterday, but I think the character of Steve Raglan is a lot better in this book so far. Because in the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, he just kind of gives Mike the job, and that's it. Like he kind of says some funny stuff every once in a while. He does that thing where he recognizes Mike's name and he kind of looks at him. But that's kind of it in the movie. He doesn't really do too much. However, in the book, he has quite a bit of character because he jokes around with Mike. He makes fun of him all the time. And the second that Mike makes fun of him, a tiny little small joke Mike makes fun of him, you can tell that it like really, really hurts his ego. So there's a bit of a double standard there. Also, something very, very interesting. William knows Mike Schmidt's name from the start. I believe the chapter begins with Steve Raglan calling Mike Schmidt. I believe. Which is interesting. Really, really wondering how they're going to do that because he says Mr. Schmidt, he says Mike, and then he says Mike Schmidt later. The thing that tips him off to go get the coffee is really interesting too, because it isn't like he recognizes Mike is Garrett's brother or anything like that. Rather, he just kind of stops mid-conversation and then walks over and gets coffee. You know? It's very, very interesting. Yeah. So we're going to do chapter 4. Are you actually stop filming me, though. Like, actually stop filming me. If I find this on Facebook, I'm reporting you to the cyber police. Okay, actually stop filming me. Actually stop filming me, though. That's like this is like actually against the law. Stop filming me. Bro, this better be public. If it's not public, I might just die. I might just die. And you can't really say that kind of stuff on YouTube. You know, people are too sensitive on on YouTube. Yeah, public. We're public. All right. Chapter 5. Watching a trio of little boys roll down a grassy hill, their high-pitched whoops tumbling together with their laughter, Mike let himself bask for a few seconds in the kids' glee. The boys were a blur of motion, curly hair and red tennis shoes, skinny white arms, plump-faced grins, and triumphant fists. Triumphant Fist. Do you think that's the name of one of the kids, is Triumphant Fist? First name Triumphant Fist, last name my name Adiz. I think that's right. Where am I? The boys appeared to be racing, but their race devolved into a wrestling, tumbling match. When they reached the bottom of the hill, they shot to their feet and raised triumphant fists. They all seemed to think they won. What would it be like to be so carefree? Mike asked himself, thinking about his dream. He reminded himself that he had a micro taste of that kind of devil-may-care fun every night. He almost wished he didn't, though. When that feeling was stolen from him over and over and over again, as his dream repeated night after night, and the loss was made more profound by that memory of what fun felt like. The boys ran back up the hill, and Mike watched them start another tumbling round. Then he broadened his gaze to take in the Child Development Center at the top of the hill. In contrast to the government building, Mike had been in. In contrast to the government building Mike had been in the day before, the Development Care Center was sleek, modern, white flow of long, glass-filled walls under a gleaming metal roof. Surrounded by nature, the expanses of grass, as well as expertly landscaped displays of flowering bushes and tall trees, the center was not even in the same universe as the ugly brick building that housed social services. This proves that Five Nights at Freddy's takes place in a different universe than the government. So that's really interesting. Even the sky was prettier here. That's the sky, not this guy. Although that would be pretty funny if it said this guy instead of the sky. What would happen if it said if it said this guy instead of the sky? That's the type of stuff that I think about. Or it's even the sky was prettier here, or so it seemed. Yesterday's suffocating gray sky was gone. Today's sky was cyan blue, and it was filled with playful white clouds, all puffy and soft-edged and rolling through the sky, not unlike the boys rolling down the hill. The sun was playing peekaboo with the clouds. I don't know why that cracked me up. Its brilliance nipples and Five Nights at Freddy's. Its brilliance nipped in and out as it peeked from behind the white sky suds, and then dipped back behind them again. The little boys weren't the only kids having fun on the grassy hills outside the center and on the playground equipment in a sandy, circular area near the edge of the grass. 20-plus kids were running around or pumping themselves higher and higher on the swings or climbing on the monkey bars or teeter-tottering with the friend. The kids ranged in age from about 6 to 15. The older kids weren't playing. They were either sitting in the grass or on one of the wrought iron benches placed throughout the area. They either chatted with each other or spoke to white-coated adults. The adults were the doctors, MDs and PhDs, who oversaw the kids who came to the center. The center's doctors had a wide array of expertise, Mike had found out. Sorry about that. The center's doctors had a wide array of expertise, Mike had found out. They were trained to help all sorts of kids with all sorts of developmental problems. Leaning against the chain link fence at the outer edge of the center's sprawling property, Mike vaguely wondered how his life might have turned out differently if he had a place like this to come to when he was 12. Grief was a developmental problem, wasn't it? Loss and guilt could stunt growth every bit as much as the kind of psychological problems they treated here. Turning away from the more active children, Mike forced himself to look toward his sister. He'd spotted her, of course. As soon as he'd gotten out of the car, Abby sat on one of the benches, not far from the center's portico covered entrance. Bent over her drawing pad with her colored pencils, Abby was well away from the other kids. Even so, she was talking. Mike was far enough away from Abby that he could hear her. That he could hear. I was doing. I'd be really. It's cool. I tend to read a lot better when I'm like not monitoring, not like stumbling over my words, but when I'm actually like when the words are just farting out of my mouth, dude. When the words are just coming out of my mouth like a big fart. These words are just coming out of my mouth like a big old poop. But I can't scream like that all the time, so you're gonna have to deal with me stumbling over my words as I read. But that's partially why I'm doing this, is to get better at reading aloud, because I'm not very good at it, especially around other people. I'm not very good at reading aloud. Anywho, Mike was far enough away from Abby that he couldn't hear what she was saying, but he could see her lips moving. He could also see her turn to look beside her, or look out in front of the bench, as if she was speaking to invisible companions. The sun burst from behind the clouds again, and the light blinded Mike. Closing his eyes, he wiped his face with his palms. Man, he was exhausted. Sorry about that. Man, he was exhausted. Man, he was exhausted. No matter how much time he spent in bed, he never got enough rest. No mystery there. Sleep wasn't for Mike. It was a project. That kind of goes hard. Mike felt a cool hand on his forearm. As he inhaled the scent of orange blossoms, he opened his eyes and did his best to smile at the slender, white-haired woman who stood in front of him. Dr. Lillian, Abin's psychologist, was a nice lady with large eyes that might have been dark blue or green or brown. Mike hadn't been able to figure out, because the eyes seemed to change color depending on lighting, or maybe depending on the doctor's mood. Weird. Dr. Lillian had a friendly face with a wide, full-lipped smile. More than one ingestion is using this primary URL. Send one stream to the primary ingestion URL and one stream to the backup. What? I don't have another stream, I don't think. What? This should be the same. What? Sorry about this. There's something going on. I don't really know what's happening. What is happening? Samcats123 Book Club 3. Yeah, this nothing else should be happening. I'm not really too sure what's going on. I'm going to ignore this. It's not giving me an option to do anything. Weird. If it stops it, I might die, though. I might, because, like, if no one's watching me, then do I even exist? No, I don't. If no one's giving me attention 24/7, I do not exist. That's just the way things go. Anywho, what were we talking about? Dr. Lillian had a friendly face with a tall and graceful. Dr. Lillian wore her hair in a shaggy, chin length cut, and her clothes were as casual as her hairstyle. She usually had on loose, light colored yoga pants and a pastel colored tunic shirt. She didn't wear a lab coat. That's like the funniest thing ever. That all these people at a child development center are wearing lab coats. Like they're dealing with chemicals every single day. That's kind of the funniest thing. Probably I've ever heard in my entire life. That's probably the funniest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. They're here, Dr. Lillian said. Are you ready? Mike's weak smile disappeared entirely. Not really, he said. Dr. Lillian patted his arm, but she didn't speak. Mike was sure she wanted to help, but there was some things she couldn't do. Let's get this over with, Mike said. This is bothering me. I don't know what this means. Something's up with my URL. Something's up with your mama. That's what I think. That's what I think. Usually, Mike was pretty comfortable in Dr. Lillian's office. A nice large room with thick blue carpets and furnished sparsely but comfortable with a small white desk. Sorry. A row of matching shelves. A row of matching shelves stuffed with books and a few nature-themed photos. A high-backed, pale blue office chair. 3 matching plush, thick-armed guest chairs, and a long blue and cream striped sofa. The office was obviously designed to be calming. Most days it was, but not today. At just 5'4", Jane Schmidt wasn't an imposing woman. Her petite appearance was helped along by the pastel pantsuits she nearly always wore. Today's suit was very pale green. When Jane stood still, and if you didn't know her, she could look insubstantial, inconsequential. With short, dirty blonde hair, Mike was pretty sure she died now. She was, after all, in her 50s. Jane had a pale, freckled complexion, or ordinary brown eyes, and a narrow face shaped like an upside down egg. In the abstract, she might have been pretty, if not for her personality. Just look at him, Mike's aunt angrily shouted. Just look at him! She waved her arms wildly, combining with her exaggerated facial expressions. The flapping arms made her look unhinged, and she thought he had problems. 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 I don't know how to read this. Well, he did have problems, but that wasn't the point. Dr. Lillian's guest chair were arranged in front of her desk, spaced about 2 feet apart. 2 feet wasn't nearly enough space. Mike, sitting to his Aunt Jane's left, had to lean back when she threw her arms out. On the other side of Aunt Jane was her lawyer, cowered in the other guest chair. He was sitting, so he canted back and away from his client. Clearly, he didn't want to be close to her anymore, any more than Mike did. Dr. Lillian Dr. Lillian Dr. Lillian, safely behind her desk, was the only person sitting straight. She was also the only person in the room who seemed to be befitting from her calm decor. What is it? 10 o'clock this morning? I'm sorry. What is it? 10 o'clock in the morning? Jane continued with her tirade. And he can barely keep his eyes open? Mike, who was aware his eyes were half closed, resisted the urge to shut them entirely. As tired as he was, his eyes weren't drooping because of that. He had them particularly shut to try to dampen the impact of his aunt's tantrum. This was a trick he'd learned many years ago. Aunt Jane was wound up for a very specific reason today. She had an agenda. but it wouldn't have mattered if she didn't have but it wouldn't have mattered if she didn't have one. She was just a high-strung woman, pretty, loud, and judgmental. Jane was the reason Mike had learned the word narcissistic when he was a boy. It was the word his mother had always used to describe her sister-in-law. So it is his dad's sister. That makes sense. Jane whipped her arms through the air again. Mike pulled back like a turtle shrinking into its shell. If only he had a shell to shrink into. This degenerate, Jane continues, is being entrusted with the well-being of a mentally ill child. Mike involuntarily brought a hand to cover his right ear. Jane's high-pitched voice, which would have done operatic soprano, operatic soprano proud, was literally hurting his eardrums. Cocking his head, Mike looked behind Jane to see if the in-law. This. Oh my gosh! Jeez, my brain is not reading today. I don't know what's wrong with him. Maybe he needs a short Instagram Reels break. Oh man, cocking his head, Mike looked behind Jane to see if the lawyer, quote, just call me Doug. I'm not much of a form. I'm not. Just call me Doug. What am I reading? To see if the lawyer, just call me Doug. I'm not much on formalities, would have the same problem, but he couldn't tell. Doug was a large man whose body was freakishly similar in shape to the melting ice cream cone, and gave no indication that he was hearing or seeing anything. The only reason Mike could tell Doug was alive was that Mike's chest heaved visibly with the effort to breathe, and he made a faint whistling sound every time he exhaled. Dude, I wonder if Doug's gonna be in. I wonder if Doug's gonna be in the second movie. They made a Funko Pop of him. They made like a Funko Pop of Doug. So they know we like Doug. I hope he's in the next movie. Anyway, studying Doug, Mike had a hard time understanding how the man had become a lawyer, or how he kept practicing, or how he kept the practice going. He looked like he was on the verge of going into a coma. Jane might have been making a big deal about Mike's droopy eyes, but what about her lawyer's slack lids? Heck, the whole face was slack, round and jolly. Doug's cheek pressed up against a flashy nose and squeezed a too small mouth. His tiny eyes were gray and dull looking. They matched his suit, which was the color of the previous day's clouds. The suit was baggy and wrinkled. Mike shifted his attention away from Doug and returned it to his aunt, who was still ranting. He tuned back in. He tuned back in just for kicks. Quote, who cares for the mentally ill? Who cares for the mentally ill should have at least a hint of maturity. Jane pointed at Mike's jeans and t-shirt. Do you see maturity in him? Jane put her fist on her lips and glared at Dr. Lillian. Dr. Lillian ignored the question, as if made clear many times. Dr. Lillian said, Abby is not mentally ill. Aunt Jane made a sound that was a half snort, half raspberry. Oh, right, she said. Of course not, because it's perfectly normal to sit around by yourself drawing pictures and talking to magical creatures who don't exist. Jane wound herself up even tighter. That child is a train wreck, she shouted. She's light years behind where she should be at this age, and it's only going to get worse. By the time Jane got to the end of her sentence, her face was bright red and her voice was cracking. How about we all take a slow breath, Dr. Lillian said, so we can calm down. The we wasn't a we at all. Dr. Lillian was calm. Doug was so calm he was practically unconscious. Mike was tense, but he was calm enough Jane, the one who, "Don't you dare tell me to calm down," Jane shrilled. She pointed a finger at Dr. Lillian. "You're her doctor, but you're trying to make me feel like I'm the cuckoo here?" There was no trying, Mike thought. Jane was a. Sorry. There was no trying, Mike thought. Jane was the cuckoo in the room. And what did he, and what he did to that poor man, Jane said. The volume of her words dropped startlingly, and her tone changed to what Mike thought was supposed to be sympathetic. And what she did to that poor man? Mike watched Jane lower lip quiver. He suppressed a smile when he saw Jane squinch up her eyes like she was trying to squeeze out tears. Jane waved his hand like a southern belle attempting to stave off an attack of vapors. "I'm sorry," she said breathily. "I just." Jane dug a tissue out of a large cream colored purse. She blew her nose loudly. I don't have tissues around. I'm not going to do that. There you go. Mike glanced over at Dr. Lillian. She met his gaze and gave him a sympathetic look. Real sympathy, not the fake crap that Jane was attempting to sell in the room. Jane blew her nose again. Shoot. Jane continued as being. I think I missed the page. There we go. Jane blew her nose again. Mike, Dr. Lillian, and Doug sat silently. My head is so light right now. Holy. This was a one-woman play. All they could do was wait for her to get to her next line. Jane finished nose blowing. My freaking head, dude. Oh my gosh. Jane finished nose blowing. She dropped her dirty tissue on the floor. Mike looked at it, and he felt his lip curl. He really hated his aunt. "Now look," Jane said. Mike wasn't sure who she was talking to. Him? Dr. Lillian? Obviously not Doug. "I was trying to play nice," Jane went on. "I really did." She clasped her hands together and pasted a nicey nice smile on her face. Mike, man, it's not so cute. "But I have to think about Abby now," Jane said. She arranged her features into an expression that Mike thought was supposed to be regret. It looked more like constipation. That's funny. "Enough is enough," Jane said. Finally, something Mike could agree with. He'd had more than enough of this meeting. No one said anything. Jane looked at Mike. Then he turned towards Doug. Doug still looked like he needed a ventilator. Mike wasn't sure Doug had heard a word from Jane. "Doug," Jane said. Doug didn't move. Jane leaned over and poked Doug in the ribs hard. "Doug!" she shouted. Doug jerked, coughed, and blinked several times. um, he looked around as if to remind himself of where he was. Once oriented, he cleared his throat and picked up a briefcase that sat next to him, his small feet. The feet were tucked into expensive black shoes. Mike thought they were called Oxfords. Jane tapped her long, meticulous fingernail, gross, pale, covered in pale pink polish that in no way matched her personality. That is disgusting. On the slick leather of her bag, she pulled her lips together into a disapproving purse. Together, Doug was obviously. What am I reading? Doug was obvious of his client's scrutiny. He He concentrated on opening the briefcase. When he finally pulled out a sheaf of papers, Jane snatched them and turned to shove them at Mike. He had no choice but to take them. Glancing down, Mike's stomach shriveled. They were custody papers. In your heart, Jane said, you know this is the right thing to do. Mike didn't know that at all. In his heart or any other part of his body. I hope you'll sign, Jane said. Mike lifted his head. And if I don't? Jane waved. I'm reading that again. I hope you'll sign, Jane said. Mike lifted his head. And if I don't? Jane waved a hand toward Doug. Then my lawyer and I will take you to court, where a judge with an ounce of sanity will make sure you never see your sister again. Dr. Lillian cleared her throat and began. That's. Jane shot up from her chair and held the flat of her palm towards Dr. Lillian like a traffic cop. That's it, Jane said. We're done here. Jane took a step toward Doug and whacked him on the shoulder like an obedient, if abused, dog. He closed his briefcase and stood. Dr. Lillian stood too. What about Abby? She asked Jane. Have you considered what she may want? Jane slowly turned toward Dr. Lillian, pulling in her chin and drawing her eyebrows together. Jane tipped her head to one side as if she was studying something in a circus freak show. Abby, Jane said, is 10 years old. In contrast to the serene oasis of Dr. Lillian's office, the development center's hallways were a chaos of colors and lights. The walls were papered in red, purple, and orange stripes, and the hall floor was covered in carpet squares of nearly every color imaginable. When Mike and Abby first met with Dr. Lillian, she had explained that a lot of kids at the center needed an abundance of stimulation. That might have been the case, but the visual stimulation got on Mike's nerves, especially now. After Jane and Doug had left Dr. Lillian's office, she'd asked Mike if he needed a minute. He'd shake his head and stood up. He was really rattled and furious, and actually, he didn't know exactly what he felt. He couldn't pull a word to it. All he knew was that his stomach was in at least 50 separate knots. In his his colon felt so tangled. He wouldn't have been surprised if food never got through it again. His head didn't feel so good either. His ears were hot, and he was sure an invisible hand was clasped onto his skull, trying to press him down through the floor. Mike didn't want to feel this way in front of Dr. Lillian. He needed to get out of there. That was why they were in the hall. When Mike said he had to go, Dr. Lillian had insisted on walking him out. Other than all the colors, the hall was empty, surprising himself because he'd planned on getting away with just saying a word. Mike blurted, "She doesn't want Abby. She just wants the trust fund." Dr. Lillian glanced at Mike and gave him a gentle smile of understanding. Dr. Lillian was good at understanding. Maybe that was why Mike kept talking. Trust fund. Bro! Elijah's here. Elijah's here. We're reading Five Nights at Freddy's. Don't worry, nothing interesting is happening. What is a trust fund? I kind of don't know what that is. An agreement where a person or group have control over assets or cash on someone else's behalf. Okay, that makes a lot more sense because in the movie, a tangled colon is a bad thing. Bro, you clearly have never had a tangled colon before. Bro, tangled colons are underrated, dog. Tangled colons are so good. Gosh, if I could have a tangled colon every single day of my life, I would. I totally would have a tangled colon. Holy. Anyway. I'm trying to get better at reading. That's why we're here. I'm not too good at reading out loud. And I think the only way I can convince myself to read is if I do it for Elijah Carter. Anyway. Where are we? Trust fund, trust fund, trust fund, trust fund, trust fund, trust fund, trust fund. Dr. Lillian glanced at Mike and gave him a gentle smile of understanding. Dr. Lillian was good at understanding. Maybe that is why Mike kept talking. We already read that part. The trust was set up for Abby, not for anyone else. Not me either. I can't even use it to pay the rent, and that's fine. I'm glad it's there for her. Okay, this is a lot better than what happens in the movie, because in the movie Mike just kind of vaguely says that she wants Abby for um, like the government benefits of it, just like so vaguely he says that. And it's like, okay, if she's getting government benefits for watching Abby, then why do you guys live in such a bad situation? Right? But if it's a trust fund, that makes a heck of a lot more sense. I don't know why they didn't just make it a trust fund. I don't know. That's so weird. That's like one of the main parts of the movie that I think is like very, very weird. Like, why does Aunt Jane want Abby? This makes a lot more sense than how it is in the movie. My name is Jeff. Let's get through this. Dr. Lillian gave Mike another smile. This one seemed to be one of approval. But Jane and the lawyer were going to find a way to get into the trust if she gets custody of Abby. Mike went on. I just know that's it. That's what her long-term plan is. Dr. Lillian didn't disagree. And in the short term, she'll get the checks from the state. There we go. That's that. That's basically the explanation they give, is that she'll get the checks from the state. It's not about Abby. It's about Jane. It's always been about Jane. Dr. Lillian opened her mouth, but then closed it. Another sympathetic smile told Mike that, once again, she didn't disagree with him. Together, they turned a corner, headed toward the center's activity room. A couple of boys, about Abby's age, went racing past. The smells of dirty socks and chocolate went with them. So did the pounding of their feet. She makes a she makes some good points though, Mike asked. Aunt Jane, whoa. I think I just read a totally different sentence. She makes some good points though, Mike said. Aunt Jane, I hate to admit that. But what am I reading? Aunt Jane, Aunt Jane. I hate to admit that. But she's right that I'm not really the best fit to be raising a kid. Dr. Lillian finally spoke. I know a little girl who would strongly disagree. Mike threw up his hands. Come on, Doc. You can't be serious. Abby talks to the air more than she talks to me. I could drop dead and she'd be too busy drawing pictures to even notice. They'd reached the double doors that led into the activity room, but Dr. Lillian kept walking. She motioned for Mike to follow her. He did. Just past the doors, a long, wide window looked into the room, with thick, bright blue rubberish flooring and multiple play areas. Some of the areas were nothing more than a collection of colorful pillows and cushy play cubes that kids stacked in forts and lay on to draw or play games. Some were climbing towers. Some were elaborative cave like areas similar to Abby's Heidi tent, but more sophisticated. The play areas were placed wide apart, so there was plenty of open space for the kids to run around. Mike did a quick count. 9 kids were either chasing one another or playing games. Okay, what time is it? I do think I have to go at 4, so we could probably knock out another chapter after this. Within this next one. Yeah, we can. Okay. There was also several little tables dotted the room. The only one currently occupied was the one on the far side of the room. That's where Abby sat, by herself. Mike gestured toward his sister. See what I mean? Dr. Lillian watched Abby as she spoke. You know, pictures hold tremendous power for children. Dr. Lillian shifted to face Mike. You've heard the expression, seeing is believing. Mike frowned and shrugged. Sure. What was the doctor getting at? Dr. Lillian crossed her arms and leaned back against the glass. Before we learn to speak, images are the most important tools we have for understanding the world around us. What's real? What matters to us the most? These are things children learn to communicate at almost exclusively through pictures. Dr. Lillian paused and Mike nodded. Okay, he said. He still didn't see her point. Dr. Lillian cocked her head and then for a second and thought for a second, sorry. Dr. Lillian paused. Dot, 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 dot. Dr. Lillian cocked her head and thought for a second. Then she tried again. See, kids aren't all that good at consciously accessing what they feel. Their artwork is sort of like their subconscious. So you're saying Abby's drawings actually mean something? Mike asked when the light bulb finally came on. Dr. Lillian nodded several times without question. Mike chewed on that for a second. Dr. Lillian put a Elijah, your drawings mean skibbity toilet. I think that's what your drawings mean. I think you drew Peter Griffin in Fortnite, and then 2 months later, Peter Griffin showed up in Fortnite. You drew Skibbity Toilet in Fortnite. 2 months later, Skibbity Toilet appeared in Fortnite. Your drawings are like the freaking prophecies from The Amazing World of Gumball. That one lady that like paints the future. That's you. You're the I guess that wouldn't be like a scribe. I don't know. You're like the fortune teller of the group. That would be a very fun role to make you in 3am videos. I think that'd be pretty cool. That would be so cool. Might have to do that for the next movie. Okay. What am I doing? Where am I? Okay. Dr. Lillian put a hand on his shoulder. So let me ask you this. Who's featured prominently in 9 out of 10 of Abby's drawings? Mike didn't speak, but he knew the answer to Dr. Lillian's question. Mike was in most of Abby's drawings. Dr. Lillian squeezed Mike's shoulder. I can see you get it, she laughed. Like it or not, you're her world. Dr. Lillian chuckled. You might not believe you're the man for the job, but your sister certainly does. Mike stared at Dr. Lillian for a few seconds. Then he shifted his attention to Abby. Could it be true? Was he really the best thing for Abby? For a second, Mike felt his shoulders lift. His stomach turned to unknot, but then the inner snark kicked in. His shoulders slumped. Even if he was good for Abby, how could he take care of her if he couldn't earn enough to support them? And how could he give her what she needed when he couldn't even give himself what he needed? And then there was his Aunt Jane. How could he stop her from getting custody? These and a dozen other questions swirled through Mike's head. What if it's not up to me? Mike asked, voicing one of the questions aloud. My aunt's an idiot, but she's right. No judge in the world is going to take my side. Dr. Lillian shook her head. Don't be so quick to throw in the towel, she said. You're Abby's primary caregiver. Have been for some time, and you're her immediate family. Demonstrate even a modicum of stability, and a judge might surprise you. Is that true? Mike wondered. Did he have a chance? Dr. Lillian tilted her head. Have you found a job yet? She asked. My name is Dees. Oh, sorry. Mike didn't answer the question, but his face must have done it for him. Even a second of thinking about the job hunting failures probably made him look like he's just sucked a lemon. Dr. Lillian patted Mike on the back. That would be a good place to start, he said. She said, sorry. Okay, chapter 6. Yes, dude, you can make so many gifts with that face. Yeah, you can make so many gifts with the faces you make reading this. Shut up. I do not make a face reading this. Anyway, chapter 6. Mike sat in the kitchen. In one hand, he held his cell phone. In the other hand, he was turning a soda can around and around on the scratched formica surface. Shoot, maybe I do make a face when I read. Frick. Shoot! Dang it! I'm gonna have to look back through this stream and edit out all the times I make a face. I've been making a face this whole time! I've been making a face this whole time! Are you serious? No! I actually do have to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. That was all a bit. I didn't even go to the bathroom. I just sat outside. Dude, I went to the bathroom and came back at the part where you said you need to go to the bathroom. Bro, that's so real. That's so Instagram Reels. Oh my gosh. Okay. Let's see. So I need to go at 4. It took me about 30 minutes to read that chapter. I say if I lock in, we should be good. Because I want to just do 12 episodes. Because if I do 12 episodes, then after this one, it would have been 3. And then I just have 3 more 3 episodes after that, you know? Big brain stuff. That's all I'm saying. Then we're in the single digits. It would be 9 episodes left. Anyway, my name is Jeff. Let's get back into it. The ever-circling can was next to Steve Raglan's business card. The card was crumpled. Elijah, if you didn't watch the last live stream, because this is the 3rd one, I did another one last night. If you didn't watch that, Steve Raglan is the guy that I don't know if I should spoil it yet. Steve Raglan is the guy that offered Mike a job because he needed a job. But Mike turned it down because he had to work nights. Now the situation with his little sister is getting more complicated, and he needs a job desperately. So he's going back to Steve Raglan. Next to Steve Raglan's business card. The card was crumpled. Sweat beaded the outside of the soda can, and Mike's fingers were wet and getting wetter. Still, he kept turning the can. He couldn't bring himself to do what he knew he needed to do. Mike glanced over at Abby, who sat on the sofa, watching a noisy cartoon. Mike wasn't sure what he was watching, but there was a howling coming from the set, and a lot of raucous laughter. It was getting on Mike's nerves. Well, no, the sounds from the TV weren't really what was getting on his nerves. It was Abby herself who was bugging him. As Abby watched the TV, she frequently pointed at it and then looked to her left as if sharing a moment with someone. Mike couldn't see. Wait, you watched it? You watched the Fnaf movie? When did you watch it? I didn't think you liked Five Nights at Freddy's. I am a big Freddy Fazbear head. You want to know my favorite Freddy Fazbear? It's the lawyer from the movie. That's my favorite animatronic. That's so cool. I'm glad you watched it. We should go see the second movie this winter when it comes out. As Abby watched the TV, she frequently pointed at it and then looked to her left as if sharing a moment with someone. Mike couldn't see. I read the exact. I tried reading it again, and I did the exact same thing. Oh my lord! Oh. She frequently pointed at it and then looked to her left as if sharing a moment with someone Mike couldn't see. Another invisible friend. What was Mike going to do about Abby's imaginary friends? Looking away from Abby, Mike's gaze landed on the custody papers he tossed onto the table when he and Abby had gotten home. He'd left them face down, but he knew he needed to pick them up and put them away. Abby didn't need to know what was going on yet. Mike stood and stuffed the papers in the kitchen drawer. The papers reminded Mike of Jane's plan. Mike's attention shifted back to Abby. See? Abby whispered. Bears can do that. What? A horrifying thought leaped out of the miasma of confusion in Mike's head. How would Aunt Jane deal with Abby's invisible friends if she had custody? As soon as Mike asked himself the question, he knew the answer. Jane would have Abby put in some kind of institution. And once Abby was put away, Jane would find a way to take all the money in Abby's trust fund. This is so much better than the movie. I know people are like that. I know people are losers and they're like that. They're like, "Oh, but bro, the book is so much better than the movie." It kind of is here. Aunt Jane is infinitely worse in this book for a lot more better reasons than she is in the movie. I don't know. You know. Anywho, Mike let go of the soda can, wiping his fingers on his chest, and then pulled the business card closer to him. He punched Raglan's number into his phone. Abby continued to watch her cartoons and discuss it with her invisible friend. I just read that one sentence is 3 sentences. Oh my gosh. Abby continued to watch her cartoons and discuss it with her invisible friend. Mike took a deep breath and listened to the phone ring in his ear. A click, Raglan's voice in a raspberry mode. This is Raglan. Hi, Mike said. Mr. Raglan, this is Mike Schmidt. Raglan didn't speak. All Mike could hear was the faint sound of breathing coming through the phone line. That's what I assume he could hear. Anyway, the guy who stomped out your office yesterday, there should not be that many uhs in a sentence. Mike tried. More silence. Mike counted in his head. 1, 2, 3. Ah, yes, Raglan said. His voice had switched to smooth. Then the voice turned gruff. Mr. I can't work nights. Mike pulled the phone from his ear and scowled at it. The book about Finn was better than The Force Awakens. Oh, is there a good Finn book I need to look up? Text that to me. That'd be cool. I always want more cool Finn stuff because he was kind of cool in the first movie. And then they didn't do anything left with him. Unless you're talking about the Force Awakens book. Mike pulled the phone from his ear and scowled at it. Man, he really did hate that guy. Mike's gaze flitted flitted to Abby. He gritted his teeth and returned to the phone to its proper position. This job you told me about, Mike said between his clenching teeth, is it still available? Yes, yes, Raglan said. It's most definitely available. Why? Had a change of heart? No, Mike thought. His heart hadn't changed at all, but that didn't matter. He glanced at Abby again. How soon could I start? Mike asked. Mike's car sputtered as he turned onto the street that led through the most depressing part of town. He didn't blame the car for its hesitation. Mike didn't want to go down the street either. Potholes and swaddled, even though the sun was still grasping on to its last of the day, the grasping on to the last of the day, the long straight road was bordered by the testaments of the business collapse. On both sides of the cracked and broken asphalt and the crumbling sidewalk that ran alongside it, the endless march of failed or failure enterprises hulked in the descending dusk. A boarded up factory, a derelict gas station, a strip mall with only three still open, dimly lit businesses, a restaurant with only two cars in the parking lot, and a half dark neon sign, a couple of bars that would make a seedy bar look upscale. The whole area would depress even the most upbeat person. Since Mike hadn't been upbeat in years, he started at a deficit, and the area shoved him even further down into a dark hole of despair. Geez, this guy needs to. That's cool. Force Awakens from Finn's perspective. It's cool. Yeah, that's the only thing I think. One thing that Ryan Johnson and even J.J. Abrams don't understand about the sequel trilogy is that it's kind of Finn's movies, you know? Like The Force Awakens, he's basically the main character of it. Oh, thanks for the link. He's basically the main character of it. But, he's unconscious at the end of The Force Awakens. And then he gets like 4 girlfriends, and he basically doesn't do anything in the other 2 movies. Anything important, I mean. He'd left them face down, but golly. One hand on the steering wheel, Mike used the other one, hold on to the piece of paper he scribbled Raglan's directions on. The paper was the cover of the custody papers. Mike frowned at the directions and leaned forward to peer left. And right through the windshield. Whoops. Where the hell is this place? He asked. Too bad he didn't have an invisible friend to answer him. Instead of a helpful invisible friend, Mike had Raglan's voice in sing-song mode in his head. So here's the deal, Raglan's voice replayed in Mike's mind. The voice rose and fell and sounded muffled as it had when Raglan had spoken over the phone. This place is pretty out there. It was hugely popular with the kids back in the 80s. It's been shut down for a long time now. The only reason they haven't given it the old wrecking ball treatment is the owner's kind of sentimental. Just can't bring himself to let it go. There was something weird about the way Raglan said sentimental, but Mike couldn't figure out what it was. Then or now. But what? But Mike couldn't figure out what it was then or now. Checking his notes again, Mike spotted the turn he'd been told to look for. He urged the car past another shuttering business, an ex-nail salon. No great loss. There were too many of those in town anyway. The new street was narrower than the last one, and after just a couple of 100 feet, it was no longer bordered by old businesses. Whoops. Oh, man. Thick stands of tall trees pressed close to the road. It felt like Mike was heading into the countryside. Before things got too raw, though, Mike saw a deserted parking lot. It was just as Raglan described it. Mike turned on his signal out of habit. No one was around him. He pulled off the road and into the lot. As his car crept forward, swirls of drying leaves skimmed across the cracked pavement, illuminated by the car's headlights. A few paper cups, a discarded newspaper, and a wadded up fast food bag scattered past the leaves. Mike pulled his car further into a lot designed to hold at least 50 or more cars. Judging from the faded, almost invisible white paint demarking the parking spots, it hadn't held that many vehicles in a very long time. Mike pulled into what would have been the prime parking spot, just a few feet from the night shrouded entrance of a building that was so hidden in the dark it was a little more than sprawling shadow. Surrounded by trees and far removed from the other businesses, the building was no the building had no exterior lights. The old car's headlights did not give Mike a complete picture of the place. All he saw was a red double door and a boarded up window. Mike turned off the engine. Typically, it chugged for a few seconds and then it went quiet. Mike looked out his window side. Even though only minutes had passed since Mike had reached this part of town, dusk had abruptly given way to night, a night completely lacking in any sort of lighting. Mike was 100% sure he was not in a safe place, but there was no turning back now. Looking left and right, Mike steeled himself. He picked up the backpack he'd loaded his overnight needs in. He got out of his car and slung the bag over his shoulders. Mike, making sure his car was locked, if anyone would want to steal it, Mike took a few steps toward the barely visible building entrance. Once again, Mike heard Raglan's voice in the back of his head. The back to the rasp. Anyway, there's been a what am I reading? Once again, Mike heard Raglan's voice in his head. Back to the rasp. Anyway, there's been some trouble with break-ins over the years, Raglan said. Vagrants, drunks, obviously not ideal. No kidding, Mike said aloud. He looked around, turning full circle. He seemed to be alone. But there was a lot of places to stay concealed. He gripped the flat strap of his backpack and thought about what he'd packed. He thought he'd remembered everything, but like a dope, he hadn't thought of a flashlight. Suddenly, Mike wanted to be inside the building. He felt way too exposed. Hurrying forward, Mike headed toward the double doors. The doors were faded red, and judging from a few dents in their panels, they were made of metal. He quickly found the security pad next to the doors, just where Raglan had said it would be. The code was an easy one Mike had to memorize, so he quickly typed it in. Oh, dang it, I don't think they're going to tell us the code. That would have been cool. A loud click came from the door. The disengaged lock, Mike figured. He stepped to his left and grabbed a thick vertical black metal handle. He pulled open one of the heavy doors. The door creaked. Of course it creaked. Mike ignored the shiver that frished down his spine. It felt like one of the dry leaves from the road had gotten inside his shirt and was tumbling end over end towards his tailbone. Mike stepped into the building. Tailbone is just slang for butt. Tail tailbone is slang for butt. Whenever you hear someone say tailbone, they just mean butt. Sorry. Go ahead and cancel me. Go ahead and cancel me for saying that. Tailbone means butt. Go ahead and cancel me. I don't care. Go ahead and cancel me. Leaving the door open, just in case, Mike hesitated on the edge of the deep gloom. He inhaled several odors that made him doubt whether he'd made the right decision. The air smelled stale, not a surprise for an old, mostly unoccupied place, but more than just musty air met Mike's nostrils. Beneath a surrounding clang nearly launched Mike straight up out of his black sneakers. He whirled. Either the wind had shoved the door or it was on a self-closing hinge. The door was shut. As threatening as the deserted area outside had felt, the closed door was an even more powerful trigger of Mike's fight or flight response. His heart rate doubled. He had a powerful urge to throw himself at the door and run for his life, which was silly. Get a grip, he told himself. Mike's words seemed to caper away from him before coming back. The faint echo rotated around him. He ignored the disconcerting smell of the place and studied his surroundings. Hmm. That's that's my impression of him studying his surroundings. Hmm. Bro. Barely lit beneath the fluorescent light panels that had old dim bulbs and dirty frosted glass coverings, the expanse in front of Mike was large, maybe 30 feet around, maybe a 30 feet around lobby. The right and the left sides of the lobby were lined with low red vinyl covered benches. The opening of what looked like a long hallway extended off to the right. The other side of the lobby, opposite Mike, was a large archway. A little light shone through it, but not enough for Mike to see what was beyond it. Although the lobby was lighting, Although the lobby's lighting was down in the fathoms dingy, Mike could see enough to be struck by the lobby's almost circusy decor. The walls above the benches were striped red and white, and the floor beneath Mike's feet was covered with black and white checkered linoleum. The linoleum was cracked, and the whole section of it was peeled away from the floor. Hanging on the striped walls, rows of large old fashioned posters behind the glass advertisement Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. Took a step forward. His shoes caught on the curl of linoleum and cracked it. Once again, Mike heard Raglan's voice in the head. The security system is dated, but it's fully operational. Floodlights on the operational. Floodlights on the exterior the power can be a bit screwy. If you have any issues, you'll find the system breaker in the main office. Just give it a flip. As soon as Raglan's voice faded from Mike's brain, the already weak overhead lights flickered. Mike looked up at them. Oh, no, you don't. He'd better find the office, he thought, quickly. Mike crossed the lobby and looked down the hallway. The 6-foot corridor was long, and it wasn't any better lit than the lobby. At the far end of the hallway, 50 feet away from Mike, a bright red exit sign glowed. Mike used it as the North Star as he needed to step forward into what he felt like was a creepy, dark tunnel. Raglan's voice spoke up in Mike's head again. Mike made a face. He really didn't like having the rasp songs sing song on automatic play in his mind. Now, Mike heard Raglan say in his memory. The rest of the building is on a different breaker, which was probably installed back when Reagan was still in office. That's a Ronald Reagan reference. Shout out to all my Ronald Reagan heads out there. Mike mentally hit mute on Raglan as he carefully continued forward. Mike kept his gaze sweeping left and right as he went. Mike's footsteps made a swish tap sound as he walked over more of the old black and white linoleum. Mike could hear his breathing too. He was still on edge. The hallway's walls were painted in the same red and white stripes Mike had seen in the lobby. They were lined with large frame posters. These posters, however, weren't pizzeria advertisements. They were more than marketing. Some of the posters had images of pizza and playing children. The rest of the posters featured odd looking cartoon animals. One of the images was a brown bear wearing a bow tie and a top hat. That's Freddy Fazbear. That's Freddy Fazbear, actually. And that's a little reference to Freddy Fazbear. One of the images, the bear looked friendly enough, but Mike took a pause when he continued on and spotted a bright yellow chick wearing a bib and holding a googly eyed cupcake. A bluish purple bunny gripped an electronic guitar, and and a fox wearing an eye patch and sporting a lethal looking hook at the end of one arm. The toothy grin on the critters didn't look as benign. Mike found the fox especially to be disconcerting. The fox's one uncovered eye seemed to sparkle with good cheer, but the way the fox brandished the hook suggested that the amiability was a facade. Mike kept going. Above him, another bank of fluorescent lights dimmed a little. Raglan's voice returned to Mike's mind. My advice to you, don't mess with anything unless you've got a burning desire to die in electronic fire. No pun intended. That is a reference to Fnaf 3 about the way the building is so poorly designed that an electronic fire can just start. That's pretty cool. Haha, Mike thought as he looked up at the feeble light. Mike took another step, and he stiffened when he heard a loud crunch. He looked down and realized just broken glass from one of the framed posters. Mike looked up at one to his right. It featured all four of the cartoon animals, all but the fox stood on the stage. Behind the old-fashioned microphones, the fox was off to the left. Oh, sorry. All but the fox stood on a stage behind old-fashioned microphones. The fox was off to the left on his own purple curtain stage. Something about the separation felt threatening to Mike. He quickly went past the poster. He looked ahead and spotted the doorway he was aiming for. Raglan's voice kicked in. You'll find the office at the end of the main hall. Last door on the right. Mike reached the door like the main door to the building. It was red metal, scarred, and dented. Very dented. It looked like someone or something had tried to bash the door in. The frosted glass window in the upper part of the door, however, was intact. Strange. Mike frowned at the dents, but he reached for the black knob. It turned readily, and Mike eased the door open. Once again, he was tense, poised to flee. Jeez, he thought, why am I so freaking jumpy? When Mike stepped into the office, nothing attacked him. Nothing reassured him, though, either. The office, dimly lit only by a red, round blazing, only by a lit, dimly lit only by a red, round blaze, came from a colored bulb above the large breaker box with a prominent red handle. Was small and confining, probably because of the single red bulb the room made. Mike think of the command rooms in submarines. I think there's a. Oh my gosh, guys, it's Fred Fazbear. I think FNAF 1 office. That's cool. I don't think in the movie. Yeah, there's the single one red light bulb. Interesting. The sensation of being submerged was heightened, not just by the room's darkness, but also by its rank air. The last time Mike had smelled something like the air in this room, he'd been in a boxing gym with a friend. The smells here had a combination of sweat and blood. Mike's nose twitched as he looked around. He might as well get used to the smell and familiarize himself with the space. He was going to be spending a lot of time in it. The office was pretty sparse. It contained a long, narrow, black metal desk, which sat in front of a matching credenza, a small black fan, and a land phone next to an answering machine sat on it. What? A small microphone and small answering sat on it. The desk held an old TV sitting on top of an equally old VCR, a desktop computer, and several CCTV monitors stacked on a rack at the back edge of the desk. Two gray metal filing cabinets were pushed against the wall. I'm almost done. Were pushed up against Two gray metal filing cabinets were pushed up against the wall opposite the desk. One of the filing cabinets was missing, a couple drawers. The other was badly banged up along the front, as if it had been knocked over. Mike's gaze dropped to the floor. He saw long scratch marks that seemed to match the length of the filing cabinets. The marks didn't make any happier than the office smelled. Oh my gosh, then the office's smell did. Mike pulled his gaze from the scratch marks. He looked up at the unit's fluorescent lights above him. He noticed the bank of lights was next to an intercom speaker. Mike looked toward the breaker box again. Next to the breaker box, a large gray metal locker stood alone, looking like it had run away from its friends in a high school hallway. Mike raised an eyebrow. Was he supposed to keep his stuff in that? Mostly you'll just be hanging out in the office. Raglan's voice played in Mike's head again. The job's pretty easy. Just keep an eye on the monitors and don't let anyone in. Piece of cake, right? The very second that Mike's inner Raglan voice stopped, the feeble light in the office in the hallway went out completely. All the electricity cut out. The only remaining illumination came from the red emergency light bulb. Uh-oh, Mike said. Nope. He immediately strode toward the bulb and grabbed the lever on the breaker box. As he shoved the lever upward, Raglan's voice started up again. See you on the flip side, Raglan had said. All right, that is chapter 6. So I want to thank all you guys for being on my live stream. I will probably pick this up tomorrow. I do have to call my mom back because she was trying to call me right at the tail end of that. I've been Sam, and it looks like I've been Sam, and it looks like you've been dinner. Oh.